So, okay, thanks, Megan.
Welcome.
I had said previously that that it was okay to record this, but I'm thinking that this version of it probably isn't the one you want to record and post, because this is the first time I've actually presented this material to an audience in evidence-based practice, evidence-based medicine, and I would like input from the group about the kinds of errors and fallacies that are most common in your work, so that I can fine-tune this presentation. And so I'm going to present some things, but I'd like to have more time for discussion than just having me run through a bunch of slides. So
That's no problem at all.
okay. I ended up deleting half of my slides because I just didn't think that there was just too much stuff that I don't know is of interest to this group. So I'm really interested in getting feedback from everyone about how I can enhance this presentation for specifically for evidence-based medicine audience. Okay, so having said that, what I want to talk about today is, I can't get, okay, there we go. This is also the first time I've ever shared my screen, so is it working? Can you see the second slide now?
Yeah, it works great.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, so before I started working in evidence-based practice, I was in graduate school studying philosophy. In particular, I was in philosophy of language, philosophy of math, and logic. And then I met Gerald and started working in the EPC and found a really good fit between the courses I was teaching and the kind of work that goes on in the Evidence-Based Practice Center. So obviously, a lot of people take logic as a requirement in undergraduate study and don't really think about how it applies to their day-to-day life. And so just this first slide is just some obvious things about the benefits of studying logic, both for its own sake and the practical benefits. And this goes all the way back to the Greek philosophers. Aristotle was the first one to really work on the details of syllogistic reasoning, and we still teach his methods today. So one thing to think about is the difference between an explanation and an argument. And I think the best way of thinking about an argument in critical thinking is a technical term. So I don't know how many people are Monty Python fans, but Monty Python did a really nice skit about what an argument is and isn't, and it's a back and forth of, we should have an argument about this, and the response is just the negation of everything the other person is saying, and saying, well, this is an argument, and actually that's not an argument. So an argument involves things about not just the content of what you're saying, but the connections between the statements and what inferences you can draw, valid inferences you can draw. So it's really a matter of form. So the first example I have is I know that Bill is not at home because the lights are out, and because is something that introduces a premise, and it gives you a reason for believing the conclusion that Bill is not at home. Oops. Whereas Bill is mad because he got a speeding ticket, this is an explanation. So it's not, you're not setting up a logical relationship between statements, you're just offering an explanation for why Bill is mad. There are two types of arguments, and I'm not going to go into this today but if people have questions, I'm happy to ask them. There are deductive arguments and inductive arguments. When you talk about evaluating arguments, you're interested in both the matter and the form. So the matter is every premise of the argument true, and the form is regardless of whether the premises are true. It's just if they were true, then that would provide appropriate support for the conclusion. And given that what we do in our systematic reviews is we're focusing on the matter, we're out there trying to find the evidence, the justification for things, and then what we should be thinking about as we when we get to the point of writing our conclusions, our discussion, grading our strength of evidence is, okay, given that we can make these statements and we know that these are supported by the evidence we found, what can we justifiably conclude? And so that's a matter of form. That's a matter of the relationship, the kind of logical relationship between the evidence and what you're going to conclude. Okay, I won't talk about this because we're not actually going to get into mathematical induction. So one of the big things to pay attention to are fallacies. Where are you going wrong? And when I was talking to Gerald yesterday, one thing struck me is it's not necessarily that we are going wrong in what we're doing. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. But it's good to know, to be aware of fallacies and be able to recognize them, because our critics will often use fallacious reasoning to attack the results of our systematic reviews. So a fallacy is really a counterfeit argument. It's merely the appearance of something that's supported and well-reasoned, but it's actually not. So there are tons of fallacies, and I'm just going to talk about a few of them. You can look at fallacies of logical structure, subjectivist fallacies, and then there are other important fallacies that don't fit neatly into subjectivist or logical structure. So the most common logical structure fallacies are affirming the consequent and denying the antecedent, and I don't think this is something that we run across very often in the work that we do. So I'm happy to talk about that if anybody has questions, but I'm not going to go into any specifics. Other fallacies of logical structure are begging the question or circular reasoning, post hoc ergo propter hoc, false dilemma, appeal to ignorance, and non sequitur. I'm guessing that people have heard of some, if not all of these. So I can discuss some of these briefly, and then we can, as a group, talk about them and come up with some examples that we've seen in our own work. So for begging the question, circular reasoning, that's just as the name describes. You're trying to support your conclusion where you essentially just assume the very thing that you're trying to prove. So it's not so obvious as to say the sun is shining, therefore the sun is shining. It's done in a more subtle way, so that you have to really look and see, wait a minute, I'm reading through this and I can see in the a complicated paragraph that somebody somewhere in the paragraph has actually offered or assumed the truth of something, and then by the end of the paragraph says, therefore this is the case, even though they never showed that it was the case, never offered any support for it. Politicians do that one a lot, I've seen. Well, at least they do in the U.S. I haven't followed Austrian politics. Next, post hoc ergo propter hoc. And this one is one that I've seen a fair amount of. It's using the fact that one event preceded another as sufficient evidence for the conclusion that the first thing caused the second. So we do have to worry about causation, causality, and that relationship, and how strong the link is from what we're saying is from the cause to the effect. So so that's one that we do think about a lot, and we do try to be careful with, because you don't want to take a mere the fact that something happens to have come first to demonstrate that it caused the thing that follows it. False dilemma is a either-or fallacy. This is when you exclude relevant possibilities without justification. So this fallacy occurs if we fail to consider all the relevant possibilities. Next, we have appeal to ignorance. And this is one that we are actually trying to work against. We are trying, what the work we do is trying to thwart people who use an appeal to ignorance. This one is just using the absence of proof for a proposition as evidence that, that the proposition or statement is true. So by saying that it hasn't been proven that drug 1 is better than drug 2. I'm sorry, it has not been proven that it's not the case that one drug is better than the other, therefore one drug is not better than the other. You just get to the conclusion of that. So you have to make a good effort to look for the evidence, look for the support, consider all of your options. And this is one that I've been thinking about more for things with publication bias and what may or may not be happening if you really don't have all of the whole array of evidence in front of you, and you really don't have access to all of the options, all of the relevant possibilities before you're making a conclusion about something. And non sequitur. This one's actually kind of fun. This is where you're trying to support a conclusion, but the things you're offering for support are actually irrelevant. They don't have anything to do with what's being concluded. So, for example, the pedestrian had no idea which direction to go, so I ran over him. So there's absolutely no connection. You're using something irrelevant to support your statement of running over the pedestrian. This is another thing I will come back to if anybody wants to discuss it. But the false alternative, false dilemma, these are different subtypes of that fallacy. The next set of fallacies are subjective fallacies. And I seem to have lost my notes on these. Okay, so the cardinal virtue of reasoning is objectivity, a commitment to thinking in accordance with the facts and interpreting them logically without bias or prejudice. So subjectivist fallacies involve the rejection of objectivity in one way or another. So most commonly is subjectivism, and the most straightforward violation of objectivity is to just draw a conclusion simply based on what you believe or what you want to be the case. So I believe that escitalopram is more efficacious than citalopram, therefore escitalopram is more efficacious than citalopram. So you can't, just because you believe something to be the case does not mean that it actually is. So subjectivism is not only a way of adopting conclusions on subjective grounds, but also, and probably more often, is a way of evading conclusions by refusing to believe in them. Another kind of subjective fallacy is the appeal to majority. And this is where you use the fact that a large number of people believe that something is true as evidence of the truth. So because the majority of people believe that the world is round, implies that the world is round. It doesn't matter how many people believe something. That's not objective evidence or justification to establish that. appeal to tradition is another one you'll see. It's in where people say, well, that's the way it's always been done, therefore that's the way it should be done, or that's the way we do things, and that's the right way because that's how it's always been. Appeal to emotion is, and I put in the Latin just because I'm guessing you guys know more Latin terms than I actually know of German terms, so I thought maybe this would be helpful. Appeal to emotion is where you attempt to persuade someone of a conclusion by an appeal to emotion instead of evidence. And we've certainly seen this in, we actually have gotten this one in peer review comments on reports where, and I know that I experienced this when I was presenting at Pharmaceutical and Therapeutics Committees when I presented to them, and a mother would be there whose child had a particular illness, and she would try to appeal to emotion instead of looking at the evidence and try to get everyone to agree with her, not based on the evidence, but just on her emotions about it, her sadness or her outrage. And lastly, we have appeal to force, and this is to persuade somebody using threats. So you're trying to intimidate somebody into agreeing with you rather than actually proving your case to be the right one, or that what you're saying is true. Some other subjective fallacies are involving fallacies that involve credibility. So appeal to authority is one, and this is one that's being finally being challenged now in the U.S. as we're moving more toward doing evidence-based guidelines here. It used to be the case that guidelines on hypertension or cholesterol or obesity were based on expert opinion, and simply because somebody is in a position of authority, that is not sufficient reason for you to conclude that everything they say is true. Last, here we have ad hominem, and again, I go back to the work I did on second-generation antidepressants, and the first review we did back in 2007. In public comments, we had a host of ad hominems in comments we got, and to the point that I believe Tim Carey called some of it hate comments or hate mail. And so this is where you reject or dismiss a conclusion or an argument by attacking the person rather than the statement. So you don't pay any attention to what the evidence is and what valid inferences you can make to get to a conclusion. You start attacking the person who's making the argument and trying to discredit them. And even if you don't like somebody, you don't agree with them, you think they're an idiot, that on its own does not mean that they're not right. Ad hominem has, you can break these down into two subtypes. And I don't think these are really that interesting, but again, I'm happy to talk about them if anybody wants to. Some other important fallacies: extravagant hypothesis, slippery slope, genetic fallacy, is-ought fallacy, fallacy of division, and fallacy of composition. These are all very important. They just don't nicely fit into subjectivism or logical form. Extravagant hypothesis is one where a formulation of a complex or unlikely explanation for an event when a simpler explanation would do. So to put it in terms that most of you have probably heard of at one time or another, it's think about Occam's razor, where you work off the idea that all things being equal, go with the simplest explanation for something. Slippery slope is an argument form that you'll see a lot, and it's horrible. It's you just start trying to establish that if this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens, and acting as though there's no way to draw a line to keep the chain of things from occurring. So if we this one is one you see a lot with euthanasia, saying, well, if we allow people to make that decision about end of life, then more people will make that decision, and then it will be made by, instead of the person, it will be made by family members, or doctors will make the decision about end of life, and then ultimately we'll end up with everyone over the age of 75 will be euthanized. So it throws in, you play off of people's fears and emotions, so it brings in some other kinds of flaws in reasoning. But I think slippery slope is probably the most common fallacious argument or reasoning that I see in my day-to-day work. And I see that I've gone on for 25 minutes, and I had only planned to talk for about 20, so I will skip over the rest of these. And so I would now like to open it to questions or comments.